All right, we should be live. At least I think we're live. Let me see if there's sound. I think there's sound anyway. All right. Still new to this. But yesterday or so, we talked about kind of a range of things, preppers and what they're prepping for and what their ideas are for, how they're going to survive the event or the collapse or whatever the case may be. Um, typically, well, what we're going to get into today is things about uh, kind of what's happened in the past. The historical aspect of these kinds of uh, sorry, I lost my train of thought again. But anyways, the historical aspects of these events that have taken place over thousands of years with groups of people, whether it be small communities or you know growing up all the way to nation states and you know tribalism and uh, you know recruitment of children for warfare in foreign countries, stuff like that, just the different things that occur uh, in different places around the world, how they happen and why they happen. And then of course we have to stop and think and say, well, why does that not happen here in the USA? When in all reality it kind of does. It just happens on a different scale. uh, just a simple example of that is like, a kid being raised by his grandmother growing up in the projects, turns to slinging dope, and next thing you know, he's a street warrior. He's got to fight for his life, or his buddy's life, his brother's life, all under the guise of making somebody money. Um, give me 1 second. I've got somebody wanting to join in on the chat, maybe provide me with a little bit of feedback, see where I'm going with this, and see what are some of his ideas. Maybe be each other's backboards. But decided to be a little more prepared this time and kind of come up with just a short list of some things I wanted to cover, some things that I feel are relatively important. Because what one thing we do know is that if there is any major natural disaster or unnatural disaster, um, the government will a spend money, b spend resources, c spend troops, which or you know provide any assistance and aid depending on the situation. You know, it's all kind of like we have a phrase in the army, terrain dictates. Um, but the three things that I'm going to kind of get at are us versus the government, us versus us, and us versus foreign power or entities. Now, um, I don't know if I necessarily want to go in any particular order on these because they don't have any kind of uh, relevance one over the other, because the situation could could be such that you could be dealing with one or two of these or all three. Um, but we'll talk about them a little bit individually. And I guess I'll just start at the top with United States, or us, the American people versus the government. This is a sticky situation because, having served in the government, I know that it's part of your duty to follow the orders of the officers appointed above you, and that's rock solid, or should be. Um, but I don't think that the majority of the government and its employees are going to just up and turn on the American people. There'd have to be a reason. There would have to be some kind of uh, major situation where, say, the government staged to go in and deal with a certain situation, and then a group of fools act out and cause mass confusion and chaos, or even a terrorist attack or something like that, and then they got to bring out the big guns and deal with that situation and lock everybody down and do the whole nine. um, I know this because that's how we dealt with things overseas. When we were in a situation where we're, say, conducting a certain operation or whatever, and then something else happens in the process, we've got to be able to transition between the two. And that doesn't mean not complete the first mission. That means complete the first mission and transition into the second mission and complete it, whatever it may be. So that's kind of how the government works. It kind of doglegs a little bit, and it makes it very effective, especially because they have such numbers and equipment and tools and resources at their disposal. It makes them very effective. Makes it very difficult to defend against or mount some kind of offensive against them, should they be the, as they say, tyrannical government that we have, even though we're still the best country on the planet, as bad as things are, except maybe California, but that's a whole other story. Their government's whack. But let's just say for a second that we, as people, had to fight off against government and federal officials. There's some examples of this in the past. The Bundy Ranch situation. The what was the Waco, Texas, that was another one where, like, the example that our forefathers set was, you're American, you can do what you want as long as you're not infringing upon the rights of others. That's the way it works. And then the government goes in there and kills a bunch of people, and it's like, yeah, that's an abuse of power. Not that I agree with Bible thumping, what's his name? I mean, I'm not, for that specifically or necessarily. I have my own beliefs, but you know, I don't think that what he was doing necessarily deserved that kind of repercussion. It's not right. Like, the purpose of the law as it is enforced is to bring people to justice, not to death unless death is necessary. And that's like the problem we see nowadays with police officers, is they don't have either positive identification of a firearm, or they don't understand, the differences between a hostile act and a hostile intent. You've got to know the difference between these two things. Otherwise, you're going to kill somebody that didn't need to be killed. Oh, you want to talk about the Dallas shooting? Yeah, I'm not going to lie. The Dallas shooting. Oh, you don't want to talk about the Dallas shooting? Yeah, I just checked the chat. I didn't realize what was being said. Yeah, the point is the government is just like any other organization. They're going to do whatever they want or whatever they can in order to maintain power. Um, that's kind of what it's all about. Now, our forefathers did some great things with our Constitution, limiting our government and allowing the people to exercise their own power under their own free will with their inalienable God-given rights. That's never been done before. The closest were, you know, I don't even think that there is. I don't even think that there is anything close to it, to be honest with you. No, there was Babylon. Babylon was like that, and they got too powerful and too greedy, and they got destroyed and separated, and spoke in different tongues, and now we have the different ethnicities of the world. So Babylon would be the closest to the United States government and how it's supposed to work and function, with people in place of power figures ruling, and the power figures serving the people. That's, we all know this stuff, but I mean, you know, let's get back to the good stuff. Us versus the government. How do we go about doing that? Well, number one, don't get caught. But anybody that's done some shady stuff or hasn't walked a straight and narrow line their whole life kind of knows how to get away with different things, or whatever the case may be. And um, sorry, I'm being distracted. Titan, good boy. Uh, so like, there's people out there that know how to kind of like mess with the system a little bit and kind of get their way without. I guess the simplest way to put it is work as hard as the next guy. They cheat. You know what I'm saying? They cheat the system. Um, and in a situation where there's a financial collapse or something like that, these may be some of the people you want to associate with because they're constantly thinking about how they can cut corners. Now, I know it sounds bad, like, oh no, cut corners, you're going to make a mistake or miss something. No, I mean really cutting corners. I mean taking a square and turning it into a circle so that it fits in the round peg. You know what I'm saying? Like the ones that are problem solvers. Pay attention to people like that. See how they operate, how they move, where they go, what they do, how they think. But I guess the hottest topic on us versus the government is the defending yourself and your family from a tyrannical government aspect. So let's talk a little bit about that. Having been on the other side of the door, kicked it in, gone inside, ripped somebody out of their bed in the middle of the night, and ripped their wife out of their bed in the middle of the night, ripped their children out of their beds in the middle of the night, and segregated them and questioned them tactically for an extensive period of time in order to gather intelligence to go do the same thing to somebody else. It is about the most violent thing you can imagine. It's one of them. One of them. It's scary. It's scary how violent it is. Just the intensity of that kind of operation is, I mean, your adrenaline is just going through the roof, like constantly. Um, so, like, you don't want to be on the receiving end of that, right? Because that's exactly what the government's going to do. At some point, the government's not going to ask nicely. At some point, the government's not going to say, oh, here's your gun buyback. We'll pay you for your guns if you turn them in. Like, really? You think one, it doesn't, it's stupid. Like, if unless the government or the police department or the state officials or whoever that orchestrates these gun buybacks says, I'll pay you more than what you paid for it, so that they make a profit off of it, the smart ones ain't gonna sell those guns because they bought them for a reason, and they're not getting rid of them. So your gun buyback's not going to reduce crime. It's not going to make the world a safer place. You think a gun buyback would have stopped the school shootings? Got a question in the chat. Will the soldiers actually go against their family and friends? Uh, no. I don't think so. I think the soldiers, sailors, and Marines, Coast Guards, airmen, I think the majority of them will stay faithful and will uphold the Constitution. So they would end up right. So they would end up turning against the government. It'd be a mutiny of some sort. Um, Now, here's where it gets weird. See, there's one. There, I think I read off the list. I said us versus the government, us versus us, and us versus a foreign power. There's actually one more that I wasn't going to get into, but um, you kind of brought this up. Not brought it up, but reminded me of it. So I might get into this one next because this one's going to get kind of crazy. Uh, but back to us versus the government. Um, Being able to defend your family from highly trained, very dedicated, and highly motivated soldier like policemen or federal agents or even military personnel. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but should it happen, you've got to be able to see. You've got to be able to do the same things that they can do. And this is why the Second Amendment is so important. It says to keep a well-regulated militia. It doesn't say let the rest of the world advance technologically with their weapon systems and their tactics and techniques while we get stuck standing there in a line firing across a field one bullet at a time or one ball at a time. It doesn't say that. It says that we'll be armed and develop a well-regulated militia to fight against tyranny. So the goal at some point has to be not prepping and having all these food stores and having all these barrels of water. The goal should ultimately be how do you defend what you have? And when you've got a company's worth of men, 45 guys or so, surrounding your house with automatic weapons or burst fire weapons, what are you going to do? Well, you could surrender, but then you're just going to end up in a prison camp, maybe. Um, I mean, these are worst case scenario kind of things. You know, let's see. We got another question. Most militias are just average citizens. Some of them are veterans, active and former soldiers and such. Uh, but there's a great portion of them that are just average citizens, like regular Joe. Um, and they get to go out, every so often and do a little bit of training here and there, and first aid, and some shooting drills and some movement maneuvering drills and stuff like that. They have a blast, but some of it's spent camping and drinking. It all kind of depends, but um, and they believe in storing supplies and to pay their dues and stuff like that, and that goes into a fund for MREs and all that kind of good stuff. But uh, Anybody can form a militia. Anybody can. And you don't need permission from the government. You don't need permission from your mom. You don't need permission from anybody. You can start your own militia all by yourself. It doesn't have to be recognized or sanctioned by a state. It just says that it has to be organized. Says, but they have a very strong disadvantage. You talking about the militia has a strong disadvantage? Um, well, they have several different disadvantages. You know, they don't have the TTPs usually of a modern combat unit. They don't have the they certainly don't have the equipment. Oh, TTPs, tactics, training, and procedures. My mistake. My bad. I should have just said that instead of giving the acronym. Um, yeah, that's that. Like in Iraq, that's exactly what we do. We sit there and we watch these guys, over a period of time and find out what the enemy TTPs are, and then we base our movement off of that, and they do vice versa to us as well. So it becomes this game of cat and mouse. Um, but that's essentially what's going to happen um, in a people versus the government situation. Is you're going to end up with a cat and mouse game where you know small pockets of resistance within the local population are going to organize, and they're going to attack the local governments, and they're going to do so unconventionally and conventionally. Probably not so much conventionally, simply because they may be completely outnumbered and outgunned, so they have to find other ways to uh, approach the situation and be effective at the same time. uh, Everybody's heard of the IED. It's popular overseas and it's very effective. Um, that's a great way to do a lot of damage in a small space. And yeah, it works. It works really well. And when you want to get real crazy with it, I mean, you use IEDs in conjunction with small arms fire from multiple directions, and you've got yourself a complex ambush. You know, I don't care if you're in trucks or this SWAT MRAP. You know what I'm saying? Like you hit that thing with an IED, you're gonna at least slow it down. If it's a big enough IED, you might flip that thing over, and you just don't have to worry about who's inside, because you flip over inside of 15 tons, 20 tons worth of metal. You know, you're not waking up right away, at least. But that's like, anyways. So organize small groups of resistance, plan, rehearse your plans, exercise those plans in mock environments over and over and over and over and over and over again. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Get it right before you do it. Otherwise, you may not get it right when it matters. and then carry out your operations against the quote unquote tyrannical government. Does the resistance have to be aggressive? Um, I don't know. Ask Antifa. Do you call that aggressive? They consider themselves to be the resistance. Um, no, the resistance doesn't have to be aggressive. And there are humane ways to go about it. You just got to be really careful about how humane you want to be in an environment where everybody wants to kill everybody. You got to realize, like, half of these preppers and stuff out there, they're just waiting for the day for stuff to hit the fan, just so that they could go out and there be no rules and they can do whatever they want with what they've got. How thin is this line? Like, how soon is this going to happen? Oh, the line needing to be walked. You know, it's pretty thin. It's pretty thin. It all kind of depends. Peace is something that is so fragile that it's the peace. This is what's amazing. Is peace is something that is so fragile that in order for it to exist, it has to be maintained by warfare. And that has been going on since Cain and Abel. Between ourselves, you saying like between Americans, the people themselves, or America versus government? I want you to be more specific, if you can. Average Americans, um, or Americans versus government. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Check Roger. To be honest with you, the line that you have to walk in order to survive in a world where there is limited government or no government or an overwhelming government, um, in order to stay alive, is the kinds of lines that heroes and villains are made out of. You know, you don't have everything becomes a little bit more gray in that situation. You don't have the government keeping people in line, so to speak, or the monkey on your back saying, you know, I got to behave this way and I got to do good and be righteous or whatever the case may be. That goes out the window. It's all about, you know, whether or not you can feed yourself and feed your family. Um, and I say feed yourself first, simply because if you can't keep gathering food because you're too weak because you're feeding your kids and not yourself at the same time, um, then eventually your kids are going to starve and you're going to sit there and watch that happen. And you'll be praying to God that you go before they do. But then you don't want to leave them at the same time. So that's the situation you want to avoid. So you got to feed yourself and then you got to feed your family. Because the sad, sick truth to the whole thing is that, you know what? You may have a family when stuff goes down, but you don't know if you're going to have a family 24 hours after that. They could come in the middle of the night and take your family away from you, put all the men to work. You could get raided by hostile forces within your neighborhood. Let's see, but feeding communities not possible, or so. If we have decent government functioning, at the city level and state level, then there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be fed. But the concern has to be, how do we get that food? How frequently do we get that food? And what's the volume of that food? Because I'll tell you right now, from handing out bags of rice and potato chips and stuff like that to Iraqis, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tons worth of food off the back of flatbed trucks. Um, because these people have nothing to eat, they're like going ballistic over what they can get off that truck. Now imagine if you weren't bringing them that food. How do you think they'd act then? You know, there's I don't know. Well, grow it themselves. Iraq is a failed state. They don't really like. I mean, at one time they had a booming agricultural system going, but um, they don't really anymore. Or at least they didn't last time I was there. Uh, let's see, grow it themselves and hold what we have. Oh, you're talking about like if we were to, grow our own plants and uh, vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. Yeah, that's always a good idea. Yeah, sure, certainly. That's a good idea. But here's the thing: understand that the government may come by your house one day and confiscate everything that you grow and tell you it's illegal to grow in the city limits while you're under quarantine. Here's the thing: is like, so it if there is a airborne event, a virus or pathogen or something, it could even be the flu. And if the CDC deems it as a threat, then the government steps in and says we're going to do this, this, and this. Okay, then the CDC has the power to then mobilize and move other agencies in order for them to get their mission accomplished, which is to go in and analyze the information and data that they can gather in the affected area, and then develop, whatever countermeasures that they have. Um, but in the meantime, they may not let food in because it's a risk of getting contaminated. Like everybody's worried about like the grid going down, and you know like, oh wow, we got to live without electricity for 6 months. Whoop de doo. Like, go to Alaska, go to Iraq, go to go to parts of Africa. Like, there's people all over the world that have spent their whole lives living without electricity. Go to South America. Or if they do have electricity, it's it's yeah, it's livable. Right, without electricity it's livable. Sure, absolutely. Like, are you going to tell me you're not going to eat a brick of ramen noodles dry? Like, who hasn't done that? You know what I'm saying? Might add a little water to it. You don't need electricity. You don't need a stove. If you need to, make a fire. Learn to make a fire. Learn to make a fire. Get yourself a fire stick. Like, hang that around your neck. Keep it in your go bag.
Or a magnifier glass. Babe.
Huh. Magnifying glass? Yeah, but that's slower.
I'm just saying, it comes to worse.
Yeah, magnifying glass works. Or a beer can and some chocolate? Really? Okay. um, so the point of what I was getting at with us versus the government is that we'd have to create our own insurgency and understand that they're going to be using counterinsurgency tactics in order to kill us before we kill them or take down their resources or what's valuable to them. Like, you know, a quote unquote patriotic terrorist organization may want to, you know, commandeer a helicopter on top of a hospital so that they have quick exfil to go and then knock over a police department and take its weapons, ammo, and supplies. Helicopter can carry a hell of a lot more weight than a pickup truck can. Like, these are things that people don't think about. Like, what are you gonna do? What needs to be done? These are the things that happen in third world countries that may very well happen over here. Like, well, what's funny is I don't even like the game Grand Theft Auto. I don't like it that much. I've played a few of them. I've enjoyed playing them, but as far as a game is concerned, I don't really care for it. But like, that's like the pandemonium on a small scale compared to the pandemonium in real life if there is a catastrophe. Wow, we're already about 45 minutes into this thing, and I still got a couple more on my list. So, us versus us. Let me race through this real quick. again, the same beginnings will happen. You will have small groups of people banding together to take on larger groups of people. And then it will turn into this neighborhood will sack this neighborhood for its resources and its shelter. And then it'll turn into this town. I live in like a tri-city or more community where I've got multiple townships all strung through attached to each other. And what could potentially happen is that you get 5,000 people together and everybody rides into the next town and they just lay waste to everything they see and take everything they have. Everybody's like, oh, Walmart's going to be crazy. It's going to be like Black Friday on steroids. Yeah, it is in a sense, but you're thinking way too small here. Your Walmart's not your problem. It's the town next to you and whether or not they're going to come after you and whether or not they're going to be coming in the thousands. Again, worst case scenario, like that's if there's no government or very limited government to help us out. Let's hope that that's not the case. So, us versus a foreign power. You know, there's only been one foreign force that has ever invaded the United States. And I say that term loosely because I believe there's another invasion going on. It's kind of a backdoor invasion. Um, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And they did a damn good job. You you can't you can't deny that. Um, but I'll tell you right now, one of the things that I still believe in is the patriotism of the American people and the American spirit. I mean, you see it every time a football game plays and everybody's in their jerseys and such at the stadium. It's a little bit of patriotism. Maybe not directly towards America, but towards something that represents America, that is a part of America. So it's a good thing. But if an enemy attacks us conventionally, they will be utterly destroyed. So yes, like, and I'm not even kidding. If I don't care if every country on earth attacked the United States at the same time. They would all be annihilated. Now, I say that for a couple of reasons. One of them is because I know what we have that they don't, and how serious it is. And two, I know how better trained we are now than we have ever been in the history of the world. What do we have? What do we have that they don't? Oh man, we got some toys, man. Um, there's things I can't talk. I'm not supposed to talk about. There's things I can talk about now that have been made public. Uh, um, okay, so us versus foreign power, that's gonna be the easiest, especially if they're a uniformed enemy. That's gonna be real easy. But in reality, the way it works with us versus a foreign power is not Red Dawn. It's not, them parachuting in and shooting up schools and taking out the hospitals and taking out the people and just basically doing army stuff and tearing everything up. No, doesn't work that way. They got to get in from the inside. They got to get to us from the inside. Um, the Arabs, God bless them, um, were allies with the Nazis during World War II, and their clerics and imams vowed to continue the mission that they were given to by Hitler. So they decided to travel into Europe, into the West, into the US, and procreate, assimilate to a certain degree, to live amongst us. That's a risk. I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm not saying they're all terrorists. I'm just saying that was the plan after World War II. When Nazi Germany got its butt kicked and the Arabs broke contact and stopped fighting. I don't even remember who they were fighting. Yeah, but they've been spreading Islam all around the world forcefully at times since the late 1940s, early 1950s. That's been their mission because they can't handle a stand up, straight up fight. They got the picture when when Germany was destroyed. Germany's army was defeated and surrendered. They got the picture when the Japanese finally surrendered. Same thing with the Italians. They figured it out. But if it is a straight up fight and there is an invading force, then they're going to get annihilated. No question. But Russians helped that, no? Helped what? Helped us? Yeah, the Russians were on our side. Yes, they did help defeat Germany. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so now I'm going to get into the last one, which is the scariest one. Um, Government versus government. Nobody talks about this. Everybody still talks about the tsunamis and EMP and grid going down and stuff. People don't realize that some of these things can happen naturally by a course of events. So, government versus government. Let's say that there is a coup within the United States military and some units, divisions, or even brigades and battalions break off and form their own uh, regions of dominance across the country. And then they start fighting amongst themselves because one half of them is following the orders of the government while the other half isn't. And then the people are stuck in the middle of it. And then it becomes up to the people to decide as to whose meat grinder they want to go into, what side they want to take. And then how do you tell the difference? I'll tell you right now, the average American, yeah, you show a picture of an M1 Abrams to the average civilian, and they're like, "Oh, look, it's a tank." Well, you got that right, but you don't. Um, oh, you don't know what an Abrams is? It's the main battle tank of the U.S. Army and the Marine Corps, I think. I think the Marine Corps has got them, I'm pretty sure. Um, it's about 100 tons. It's pretty massive. Awesome tank. It's got a jet engine. It's pretty cool. But yeah, imagine a situation where the government is fighting amongst itself, leaving the rest of the country vulnerable to attack from outside forces, or vulnerable to itself in that it starts eating itself alive because it's not getting sustainment from a secure and active government or federal or state or local federal services. Yeah, government versus government's the worst because then it's basically going to be everybody get in the fight. You have no choice. So and then there's going to be it's going to be like good cop, bad cop. Like this guy over here and his army is, okay, and this guy over here and his army, he's just killing everybody indiscriminately because he wants to get to his objective. Is it worse than government versus people? It is worse than government versus people because what ends up happening is a Syria-like situation versus a Venezuela-like situation. In Syria, it took like the government fighting factions and terrorist organizations and the people all getting stuck in the middle of the meat grinder and getting chopped up every day because they had nowhere to go. And then finally they started, like, other countries got involved and said, hey, start letting people out of your country, we'll take them into Europe, and so on and so forth. But before that, it was just highly destructive, destroyed the entire country, and it did it relatively quickly. Whereas when it's government versus people, you have the choice. Technically, you have the choice every day to get up and do what you can to make at least your children's day better. In a government versus government situation, there is no better, whether it's day or night. No borders, no language, no culture. You sound like a globalist. You want zero government? No. Okay. I'm reading the chat. Getting a glass of water. Waters for the week.
Is that Noah? That's Noah. Saying waters for the week. He's the one that drinks water.
Can you hear me? All right. So you want me to keep going? Where did we leave off at? Government versus government? Yeah, government versus government is pretty bad. I'll give you an example. In Iraq, we were in a situation one day where you had Iraqi police, Iraqi army, Mahdi militia, and local insurgents all fighting at the same time. So it was like, here's the city we're in, and there's just this confusion of fire going across the city for hours. Together, like on the same side? No, together, like against each other. Like it was retarded. Like everybody thought everybody was the enemy. Yeah, it's that's the kind of situation you face with there being like a government versus government conflict. Well, I think I'm gonna take a break. I've been going for a little over an hour now. I hope that this short broadcast has been helpful to somebody out there, and that it gets some people thinking about different possibilities as to how things will go. And y'all have a good night.